Good afternoon from London. Today's live Q&A is about how I work. And I'm going to focus more on the people who are asking about how I run the business side of things, how I look after myself, rather than, oh my goodness, wait for that to go past, rather than specific kinks in and of themselves. So I've gotten some questions to do with specific desires, but we're not going to go into that as much as things like how I manage my work-life balance, how I do my taxes, and other things that are probably going to be very useful for a large part of this audience. So thank you so much for asking me all your wonderful questions. It's been really an amazing response for this one. So let's just dive right in. Okay, so this is quite a sweet one. So how much is pleasure and how much is work? I have always been someone that's been quite interested in making sure that I get pleasure from everything, including the ways that I work, whether it was this particular industry or the ones before it or alongside it. And so for me, I always make sure that pleasure is at least a facet of it, whether it is in the experience in and of itself or whether it enables an adjacent kind of pleasure. So that's how I operate. Although, of course, other people have a different approach to work and they are happy to suffer a little bit for the pleasure of earning money or however, and that is their own format, but that's kind of how I do it. If you want to ask any questions, please use it using the box down the bottom with the question mark. Let's see. Okay, here we go. How do you conduct negotiations over emails? Do you prefer doing it over an instant messaging platform? I prefer to have as little contact or at least as little time invested of mine before I meet somebody. And how I do that is I make sure that I'm as clear as possible in all of my marketing and all of the words that I put out here, including this, and so they have a good impression of who I am to see whether it might work for them. And then I have an applications process that includes a lot of questions to do with me and our potential compatibility. And then, if it really works, then I indulge them with my time, which includes a lunch first before I move on to anything else. So that's kind of how I have come to it. And it wasn't always like this. When I first started, it was in the dungeon. I had no idea who it was that walked off of the street. They were in the waiting room. There was a negotiation there. It progressed to a lot of emails, but now this is the format that works for me because I find that it is the best use of my energy and my time. It can be really exhausting for me to do the back and forth thing. I'm not into it. So yeah, and some people love it. Some people charge to do a phone call before they even meet. There are many ways to go about it. So that's kind of how I run things. And I definitely don't chat to people over instant messaging before if I want to work with them, before I've worked with them. So let's see. Okay. If you think back to 5 years ago, how thoroughly did you used to plan your scenes? And how has that changed now? I think that it has changed over 5 years. Let's go to the 10-year mark also. So 10 years ago, somebody used to walk into the dungeon and say, these are my 3 or 5 or 6, whatever, kinks, and I would like to be in this room. And that was my planning period. My planning period was from that negotiation, thinking over when I was talking to them being in the shower, to them coming out of the shower. I had all of those maybe 15 minutes, and it was already very much an what's that word? That improvisational exercise in a sense. So it had a lot to do with the way that you understood the technicality of the different things, the way you understood your space, and how good you were at reading people and how you were going to kind of manifest that in your interaction. And yeah, so that was the planning period back then. And then maybe 5 years ago, it was kind of about people emailing and me sort of, and also I had to plan a little bit more because it wasn't a dungeon, it was more traveling. And so I had to bring the right things. And when I get to a space, if it's a hotel or whatever, seeing how the space is and where you can attach people to. Things like this. And then now it's different again because I do like daily things. Rather than an hour here or there, it's more like 3 days, 5 days. And so I do a lot of planning in terms of we're going to be going here and we might be meeting this person. And aside from that, I don't do so much scene planning anymore. I would say every other trip, it's a super scene planning. So whether that's hiring a very, very specific place and understanding that I really want to use the confessional booth, or understanding that there's a rigging system in this particular place in this particular city, so I want to go there and we're going to hire it for this time of day because I like the light. And so, it varies. It's varied quite a bit now. Sorry about that. I don't know why my alarm went off. But also these are longer term relationships. So it's about, really figuring out what those dynamics are and letting them grow. Yeah, so that's how things have changed for me. Let's get to something a little bit maybe more general that all of you could use. Okay. How did you train or hone yourself or creativity to come up with ideas? Okay, so I think that I've always enjoyed toying with conversation and with people. That's just the part of my nature, how I grew up, how I've evolved into how I interact with people. It's like always been very playful. How have I become better at that? By just doing it over and over and over again and allowing myself to mess up. Yeah, and to continually getting just diving into that process of interaction. I would say that reveals a lot about how humans can be and a lot about where your mind can go. And the more that you kind of access that space and allow yourself to play, the more that you're able to do so. I would say also in coming up with ideas, I think when you start to, especially in this particular aspect of this industry where there's a lot of gear involved, I think the more that you become aware of particular materials, particular gear setups, particular gear and how they move and how they work with other things, the more established you get in your technicality, the more you're able to also understand or remember, I can use that, I can join this, I can however. So I would say it's probably a combination of being playful from yourself, your own personality, as well as understanding the spaces and the things around you. And and making other people a part of that process also. And of course, I can also reach into things such as literature, things such as different art mediums and how they reveal storylines, how they reveal how characters interact and how that can influence you as well. But that's like a huge other thing. That's just a little tidbit, I guess, that I'll add in there. Ooh, okay, all right. Even more practical. Any key lessons that you've learned as a dom or worker that you'd like to pass down to a newbie? So many things. Oh man, the things you gotta learn by doing this, by traversing this industry and also traversing it alone a lot of the times when you're not working in a space together with people, when you're traveling a lot. What would I really want to tell somebody new? To reach out into your community. I would probably be my number one thing that took me a really long time to really figure out. I mean, I was lucky because I started in in houses, in like a BDSM house and in a brothel, and so in an agency, I had a little bit of a system. But even that said, I didn't really push into making friendships. I took my time to kind of get my footing, but only when I started to, in the last maybe 4 years, get really aligned into the activist worker community and the elders in the BDSM scene, did I start to really realize the nourishment that is possible from that and to see how it can help you refine your process and your understanding of yourself and yourself in the industry as well. Yeah, so I would say community is very, very important and try to get involved in a way as soon as you can. That said, also practice a little bit of discernment, because some people are not going to suit who you are. Some people are not going to be exactly as they seem. So yeah, take your time, but also get in there. Lipstick. Yeah. So yeah, that would be my number one thing. And then of course there's lots of technicalities, but you can kind of, network and liaise, and those things will help emerge when you're surrounded by people who are doing what you do. Yeah. Okay. And then there's so many great questions. How am I gonna get through all of them? All right, I can go to the bottom. No, those are answered. My goodness, there's so many. Oh, this is a new one. Do you think we tend to forget that workers are real entrepreneurs with a related mindset? We, who are we? Is it like ourselves? Is that a common thing for most freelancers? Maybe. I think that it's probably more common for people outside of the industry to have that block in understanding that actually it takes a lot to run what is usually an independent business, whether that comes to branding, scheduling, finances, profit and loss, etc. And so, yeah, I would say that that's an assumption that people really forget, and that they kind of glaze over. They look into the sexuality aspect, and they forget how much work there is around it. And I guess if that's going to be a useful point for people when it comes to how I work, I would say that a lot of like contact time actually ends up being a minority of what I end up focusing my time on, because there's a lot of planning that goes into things, and there's a lot of like press for me, and there's a lot of just administration that kind of goes into the things that are around it. And I guess if you're just starting, that's also something to be aware of. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Do I mentor younger workers? So I have actually written a guide, and if you go to eva-o.com/guide, you'll see the document there. You can kind of apply for it. And because I get asked these kinds of questions by a lot of people, and repeating myself is not ideal for me, one. And two, it's just better to consolidate everything. And three, I use it as a way to give back to my community, because I don't get any of the profits from it. Everything goes to Project X in Singapore, which is a worker organization that I love and support. And and so I don't mentor. I have sort of entertained the idea a little bit in the past, but the way that I work is super structured. It's not very casual, and I think that it would take a really specific person to be able to follow that. So I give little tips here and there, but in general, I always recommend that document first and foremost. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is part work, part personal, I guess. How do you maintain relationships with subs when you're away, especially if they're very needy? Okay, so the thing is, I guess, because humans are humans, because people in general are not taught a lot of great behaviors in terms of regulation of own emotions and communication of those, and relating skills. This is an issue, I think, not only to do with a dominant and submissive dynamic, but for a lot of people. However, that said, when it comes to the DS dynamic, an S sub can sometimes relent into nothingness. So much so that they forget that there is a responsibility of self on some level also. And the D, the dominant, can also forget that needs to be the case in a responsible framework. And so the neediness needs to be addressed first, I think, in terms of understand that you are your own person, that what your emotions are, say them to yourself, understand how you could regulate them on your own, and then communicate it so that we can move forward in a way that's going to be beneficial for the both of us. I think that needs to be addressed first. And then when you're away, I can talk about what I do. Obviously, this is to do with people who are compatible with me, so they are at a certain level of understanding the things that I just mentioned about neediness, as well as I have them in a particular app where I chat to them almost every day a little bit. I kind of link them into different things, whether that's, you know, paying for my Ubers or paying for my whatever, so that they're aware of maybe my movements, as well as being able to just be there for me in ways at a distance. There's many ways to kind of integrate people into your lives even at a distance. That said, also it's also about making sure there's a continuity and there's going to be something for us to look forward to in terms of being together in a physical capacity as well. And so those are the things that I practice. And being connected and feeling connected could look different for a lot of other people also, whether that's a little bit more scheduled in terms of when you're going to talk to each other, or however. Yeah, or what level of surveillance you want to have in their life also, if you want to like have a camera on their work desk or in their bedroom or however, and they be able to speak through it whenever, you know, things like this. It really depends, I guess, on the level that people want to invest. So that kind of addresses quite a the long distance questions. People are asking about my skincare routine. That's interesting. All right. This is interesting. So how do you create a safe and positive environment for yourself? So I think that would have a lot to do with the right community. So that's like the right community for me, the compatible community, understanding what my needs are to make sure that I'm in a good place. Right now, that's about being around my community of people who I love. And also about having the right level of mental stimulation that keeps my mind engaged and feeling like it's creating purpose for itself. So I think it's really understanding what your motivations are and making sure that that can kind of expand into your everyday, so it creates more of a positive environment for yourself. In terms of safety, if it has something to do with work, okay, so safety and positivity, aside from general well-being, which is very important actually for a workspace as well, safety and positivity in a work environment, I would say it's about choosing the right people to serve me, who are in front of me, and or understanding the limits of where they lie, so that they are there for a moment in time to fulfill the specific thing, and keeping that compartmentalization healthy within myself. In terms of like physical safety, if you're working on your own, it can be a little bit more difficult rather than working in a house where you have like receptionists and cameras and, you know, logs and things like this. But I would say that you can have different systems where people know exactly where you are, where you have somebody who is watching out for you, where you have somebody in the next room, where you have someone outside, where you have, you know, where you've collected enough identification about people, where you've cross-checked references, where you've had references at all. And so there's a few different ways that you can go through. I also go into that a little bit in my guide, but yeah, I would say that there's many things that you can do. And once you're plugged into a network of, you know, your fellow workers, there's a lot of sharing that can happen around understanding what the possibilities are for that as well. Okay. All right. When you started, how did you plan for locations? Did you use transit hotels? Did you rent a dungeon? Transit hotel, like in an airport. So how did I plan for locations? I was lucky that I started in a dungeon that had a lot of equipment and the support network of all the other mistresses there, my headmistress and the receptionist. And so I didn't rent it per se. Part of my fee went to the house who handled all of these things, including appointments. That familiarized myself with that kind of a space. When I started to tour, I started to get hotels that had like at least a little bit of a hard point so that I could attach people to them. Convenience so that people could get there. A certain sense of comfort. So I would be like a little bit more in the headspace to enjoy myself, as well as have my downtime in a way that I really enjoyed. So how did I start? How did I plan for locations? And then now, because I guess the more that you're into this, the more facilities you start to become aware of, the more friends you have with their own spaces, and the more you understand what spaces are good for what, and what kind of emotions they help people feel, what kind of scene they can kind of create for yourself and for other people. And so depends on my mood, depends on what I think is going to suit somebody, and I kind of just access that wealth of information. And I guess maybe some of the places that I love is Inanna Studio, which is by Adrina Angela here in London. And it's a very contemporary, like quite clear, minimalist space, and it's just really nice to kind of get nasty in, but also feel like really easy in. There's a lot of furniture, and it's just really nice and comforting in some way. And then another place I was just in Berlin a few weeks ago is called Residence Avalon, and that's like a huge like house on the river. You can do kayaking. There's a proper dungeon like downstairs with CCTV where you can have people comfortably sleep in overnight. They have domestic like kind of kitchen, whatever, normal facilities, and a huge throne room, and that evokes a certain thing that you can rent for days at a time as well. And so yeah, you start to become very aware. And then of course I have my house also, the main one in Bali, and that's all set up for my personal play also. So the things that I like, whether that's a rigging system, whether that's a lot of bondage surfaces, whether that's a lot of like objectification opportunities. So it depends on you understanding what it is that you like, what it is that you're aware that other people like, what kind of emotion you want to evoke, and having, do your research, be aware of different spaces and how different they can be, and go for it. And you don't necessarily even have to get facilities that have those specific things. I mean, you can play in like a private dining room, you can play, in a beautiful restaurant, you can play in discreet ways. It's like, and it's the tension of being in public also that can work for you. So the world is your oyster. Oh my goodness, we're already at 20 minutes. Let's see. So I'm going to do a good scroll, and I want maybe in the comments if you can tell me if there's anything like any general area that you think is really going to be useful for you to hear about, and I'll try to keep an eye on that also, because there's so many great questions here. Okay. All right, maybe this is a good one. What's the most difficult part about what you do? I would say that it is about managing myself. Yeah, because you're a freelancer, yeah? And you're a freelancer in a very challenging industry, and it's challenging because of the societal prejudice against it, I feel. I would say that managing my head and making sure that I am in a good place, that is not on the verge of burning out, that is being kind to myself, that is enjoying myself, is the hardest thing. And which is weird, because on one hand I get to play for a living, it's really so much fun sometimes, and I can choose the people who I want to spend my time with. I can earn very well from that, and it is all of these wonderful parameters. But because I'm working independently, I have to look out for myself, and because society is not kind to this industry, I have the weight of that following me around in my interactions as well. And so there's a lot of self-care, I think, that goes into this job, and that is probably the thing that takes the majority of my headspace and my time, alongside looking after the experiences of those who come to me. Yeah, I would say that it's on par, if not maybe even more, of my time and my energy. All right, let's have a little scroll. We're talking about entrepreneurial. Okay, nobody's made any specific directional requests on what I should be talking about yet, so I'm just going to keep going through these. Oh, this is quite sweet. Okay, so do you have rituals for getting ready for a scene? And what do you enjoy as your personal aftercare? Now, because I see people more on a relationship basis, I try to just make sure that there's a compatibility there, and I check in with myself to make sure that there is a compatibility there. Before, during, and after, it's like debriefing with myself also. So that compatibility helps set up the ease of the time together. Do I have a ritual for getting into a scene? I guess if it's going to be a very specific scene, say discipline, and I might prep around certain numbers. I might prep around a certain scenario that I want to establish the discipline for, and I might prep certain implements and or the space and how high I want a certain rig to be or however, and I think that already just kind of moves you into that space. And then in terms of what I do for my personal aftercare, that kind of runs off a little bit of the last question that we had, where I have to just make sure that my head space is in a good one on an ongoing basis. And that would also tie into a much more previous question where community really helps, and also finding the things that keep me mentally engaged in life and enjoying my own solo like time, as opposed to creating experiences for other people all the time, creating my own experience that's going to be enlivening and nourishing for me. Just outside of all of that is very important. In terms of personal aftercare, I think that even though I do get people to clear a space, I do have an ease when I start to organize spaces, whether that's starting to like get familiar with my environment again or however, that seems to put me at a certain ease. My personal aftercare is like an ongoing process for me in particular. Some people make tea. Some people take themselves out for a solo beautiful dinner, which is something that I do sometimes. It always helps me reset also. So it depends. It really depends. Yeah, there's a lot of self-care that goes into this, and doing it successfully over a long period of time, I think. Like being aware of oneself. Okay. This is a lovely question. This is getting very serious. So, at the beginning of your career, did you ever struggle with confidence issues during sessions? Okay, so the very first day that I did my very first session, which I didn't want to do, like I thought, like, I'm not ready for this, and I think the other mistresses were playing a little bit with me when they said you should do it. And then the sub was very keen, and the sub said, "Oh, it's okay, I'll take you through things." And it was like, okay, all right, I'll try that. And so, was that an issue? I think that's just us being careful. Yeah. I've never had too much of a confidence issue in how I come across and in how I can relate with people. I feel a little bit like I definitely don't know enough about a lot of things, and I definitely don't know like critically, academically, like just knowledge-wise about a lot of things, and that's probably never going to end. And that maybe stopped me a little bit when I was much, much younger, but it's not so much of an issue now. I just ask, or I just understand that it's just not going to happen, which is fine. And then did I struggle with confidence otherwise? No, I kind of work. I understand that I have my limits in terms of the way that I understand technical things, and I don't take it too hard on myself. If I really want to know, I'm going to teach myself. I'm going to take a class. I'm going to ask somebody. I'm going to make that happen. You're going to always have a limit in terms of what you're able to achieve, what you're able to create. And if you want to push past that, you just need to work on that space, I think. And practice and practice and practice, and understand that you're going to be shit and you're going to mess up, and it'll improve. Yeah. And not taking it too hard on yourself, I think, and not expecting yourself to get it perfect. The first time, or maybe even the 100th time, you can always find nuance to refine also. And so, yeah, I would say that I haven't had any issues with that, but I didn't start where I am today, and I'm not going to end where I am today either. So that's just the progression of life that's possible when you're open to that. Okay. Let's see. Maybe we'll just do like a couple more. I feel like there's Yeah, I'll go into that at the end, maybe. Mm. Okay, so that's maybe a little bit more like general and less like specific, and it's how does one become what I do? So how I started was in a dungeon. If you have access to that, I would recommend it because you get to access so much gear that costs a lot of money that you maybe don't want to invest in straight up. You get access to a lot of different interests, different clients, and so you get to maybe try a lot of different things rather than just a specific genre that people may kind of gravitate or your initial branding might put you towards. You also get to be around a lot of other people who are practicing, so you get to see how they practice, whether it's technicality or how they approach their work. And I find that very, very useful. If you don't have access to that, I would say being able to be around that, even in a community sense, even if it's online, so like social media wise, is useful to see how people have their different approaches, and skill yourself up. And that's an ongoing process. Find the things that you enjoy, whether it's a specific act, and then, see what you can learn about how to diversify on it, how to be specific about it, how to be safer about it, and practice. Yeah, and also if you don't have a freelancer background, if you don't have experience in branding yourself, in managing your finances, in understanding scheduling and understanding the administrative side of things, maybe do a very small business 101 kind of course, or ask for advice from the other people within the industry. It's very much about running business and then having community to gain knowledge from, as well as support and to be supported by. So I would say that those are maybe the things to launch yourself from. Yeah, surround yourself with inspiration and work on being that yourself too. Yeah. Okay, so I'll take a small moment here. So it's been interesting, so there's so many people who have had so many questions about this, and I do have a lot of questions from people in general over time asking about how I work, which is why we're here today and why I'm answering this. And a lot of these questions have kind of brought up quite a lot for me in terms of understanding how much of the job is actually looking out for oneself. And it's a little bit sad for me to also realize how on the defensive that we need to be because of how marginalized the industry is also, which is why I guess maybe my tone has kind of softened a little bit right now. And maybe I'll do a couple more general questions, and then I think I might need to revisit this, or I might need to use your questions to update my guide even a little bit more. But it's been really valuable for me. So thank you very, very much for this. And I hope that it's been useful for you in some ways. I'm going to try to choose maybe 2 or 3 questions that are going to be as useful as possible. Yeah. So give me a moment while I do a scroll through, because there are so many. There's some things about screening, which is in the guide, that I would recommend. There's some things about how do you find clients. Maybe that could be a good one to go into. There's some things about how I've gotten to where I've gotten, which I think I've kind of covered in a way. Some things about taxes. I have an accountant. Let's see. Safety, which I did touch on. Dress. Those skincare questions again, which are hilarious. My skincare is so basic. There's questions about scenes in and of themselves. There's a cute one about organization. I'm going to do the organization. This is light. I think I need a little bit of lightness. How do you organize your lingerie latex leather? Is it organized or messy? I'm very, very organized. Everything, if it's small enough, it's in a those sandwich bags, and it's labeled. If it's larger pieces, especially, now that I'm traveling, it's in a medium thing, but back home, in my proper latex wardrobe. Everything is like in its own bag, and it's got either a window or it's written on it exactly what it is, and it's by like tops, bottoms, like one like bodysuits, dresses, like yeah, cat suits. And then the PVC section has its own, and then the lingerie section has its own, and then it's like color and material, and so yeah. We're not even talking about the gear. The gear, they have its own like boxes. It's like what kind of cuffs go in this particular like box, and then it's what kind of material, like, and also it's structured in terms of how I might use it within sessions. So if I haven't laid everything out, I try to think about, all right, I'm probably going to first put on collars, so I'm going to put collars like in this section, and then I might want to work into this particular kind of bondage, so I'm going to have it in, so it's easy. It's like I like the organization. Yeah, all right, thank you. That was a nice little lift for me. Yeah, okay. Oh, this is a good one. Oh, I like that one. Oh, there's two really good ones. Okay. Ooh, all right, here we go. All right, maybe I'll do 3 or 4 more. How have you transformed through significant self-doubt, triggers, and boundaries? Ooh. All right, so for the first 3 years, I thought it was just ridiculous that I was using the term mistress. I couldn't, yeah. I mean, I did it for marketing purposes, but back then I had a different website and I didn't use the word mistress in that title at all, because I guess a part of me was really not feeling that I was measuring up to the people around me in the dungeon, especially. Yeah, and it is what it is. And I definitely feel much more confident now. Do I feel like it was valid? I think actually it was valid a little bit, you know, like understanding that I was not experienced yet, especially in comparison to the people who I had been working with. So for me, I actually don't mind that I had a little doubt, and that actually is probably what spurred me to keep moving. But I think when that doubt stops you from moving, then that probably can become an issue. I think if it's a motivator, it can be useful. And in my case, it tends to be a motivator. So I'm lucky like that. So maybe that's about understanding your relationship to doubt rather than the issue of having it at all. Triggers. Do they ever go away? Yeah. I would say that there were some at the beginning that took me harder to process. Yeah, very much so. Because especially when people are asking about my private life in that professional scenario, I didn't know how to bring it away from that. I would just like let them into it. And yeah, that was, wait for that to go past. That was a little bit difficult for me and for my sanity. And so now I walk in and I'm not like a heart-to-heart, kind of in a heart-to-heart space, which is used to be kind of my old way of approaching people in general, whether that was naive or just, you know, so protected or whatever, a little bit sheltered. Yeah. And so I kind of go in an observational way, and then only over a very long period of time do people really start to access that type of vulnerability that's going to really shift my mind and shift my heart in larger ways. Not that said, you need to have a certain level of vulnerability to be able to connect with somebody, but I'm not really sure what this is. Somebody else can probably say it much better than I do, but I kind of have two versions. So it's the version that empathizes with who they are, and I can bring that into a session and I can kind of like let that move my emotion. And then there's that part where they're going to see these really raw layers of me, and I'm going to need them to help me with it. And that's for much further down the line. And for me, those things used to merge, and now I kind of keep them spaced out. They need to really earn that second one. And the first one is kind of always accessible, even, you know, for the person at the shop. Yeah, it's a way that I just like to interact in general. Okay. So, and boundaries. Yeah, so I guess that's just the creation of boundaries, isn't it? Yeah, so I hope that was useful. And then there was like two really great ones that I saw that were quite further down. Yeah, this was quite cute. And it actually comes off the back of the last one. Is there an innocent or sweet part of you that stays hidden from the public or your work? If so, how do you manage that? I think that I am actually more out there, and what you're seeing here and who you see on the platform is actually very much a facet of who I am. It's not a created entity. It's not everything, but it's also, I would say that in these Q&As especially, I am quite vulnerable in the things that I'm creating, like for you to hear, as well as the places that I go to in myself. So I would say that you do get to see quite a lot of that. Whether you're able to read it is another thing, I guess. So is there an innocent or sweet part? I think that, I don't know if I would necessarily call it innocent. Maybe, it's like that inner remembrance of this inner child, this person that we've come from. And there's always a vulnerability. And I don't think I necessarily hide that. If I were, then it would come again off the back of that question. And it's about that real rawness where I do doubt myself also, and that I really need help with. And so the subs that have been with me for a very long time and some of my closest friends, it's just like, what the hell do I do? This is how I'm healing. I need your help. And so, I guess I have that space also. And I'm not going to ask you who don't really know me like that well, that not to say that some of you wouldn't have valuable things to say, but yeah, it's just maybe it's not really the platform that enables that as easily, or the relationship that sort of nurtures it in an ongoing and safe way. Yeah, but that's a great question. Yeah, and I mean, how people want to do it is up to them. I'm not saying that the way that I do it is the right way. It's just the way that has worked for me. So I'm going to do one more. There's a nice one on how I separate the dominant energy from personal or professional. That's good. And there's one that asks me about my day, which is nice. It's a lot of admin. But what do I love most? Ooh, it's something that asks about money and charities. Yeah, I think that's a good one. That one's a nice one. My goodness, I'm not really sure what to answer anymore. There's so many good ones. Okay, so Madam Nina says, I believe in abundance and the spiritual power of money. Have you ever thought about supporting a charity cause? So I actually used to do strategic consulting, and now I do that for a few charities pro bono. And then everything from the guide that I mentioned earlier, eva-o.com/guide, goes to one of those charities called Project X in Singapore. And that's a worker organization. Yeah, for me, I'm not sure why, but that's always been important for me. Yeah, and also when it comes to my relationship with money, I'm definitely careful, but I definitely do what I guess people call as this practice of abundance. I'm also not scared of losing it. Yeah, for many reasons. We could go in maybe another time, but yeah, and I guess that puts me in a position that's less fearful, and that allows for a lot of decisions that have ended up being better for me also. So yeah, that's maybe a whole other topic, and that's interesting. But it's and also I think being able to funnel money back into the industry, so other workers, I find like very nourishing as well for the benefit of how we could move forward as a group. Yeah, and so you want to call that mutual aid funds and these kinds of initiatives. Yeah, I'm definitely not educated enough to understand the true benefits and how to communicate that here, but it's also been for me on a personal level very nourishing as well. Okay. All right, so that was quite a few things, and that was 45 minutes. And there was so many questions that I could continue to go into. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of the questions that you've submitted, and I'm going to go over this also and see if there's anything that I can add into eva-o.com/guide, the guide that I wrote. And and again, I would suggest that anybody who's starting or even like progressed in their journey and they want to see how I run my business, that they apply to get that, because it really has a lot of like my models, and as well as how I do different things like screening and how I even meet people and why I position myself the way that I have. That would probably be the most useful thing. And I hope that it's been a little bit more of an insight also into the personal aspects of how I approach my work. Yes, so thank you so much for your interest. It's a lot for me to process, and I'm going to have to continue to process just the sheer amount of incredible interest that has been invested into this topic. And I really wish you all the best in terms of how you start to define the job for yourself, and how you start to understand where it is in the whole scheme of life that is laid out, and where they've put our industry, and how we are growing into more powerful and vocal places in that sphere also. So thank you so much for joining me for this month's Q&A 31, how I work. And I'll process a bit and write a little bit more about this later. You can probably see that I'm a little bit more stumped in this one than usual. So it's touched a nerve, and I thank you for that. So I'll see you next month, and thank you for everything. And